The shopping cart hit the ground first, a dull thud that echoed through the afternoon air. Then came the shouting, "Move your car now." Ethan Ward froze. His groceries spilled across the asphalt, oranges rolling beneath parked cars. A man in a navy polo stood in front of him, veins bulging on his neck, his wife already lifting her phone to record. "You heard me," the man barked. "This is a private lot. You people can't just take any space you want." Ethan straightened his shoulders, eyes steady, calm, controlled. His body language said discipline, but his silence said more. The kind of silence that comes from a man who's learned that power doesn't need to be loud. The woman spoke next, her tone sharp and dripping with superiority. "Security! Someone call security right now." Her voice carried through the parking lot, turning heads. Shoppers slowed, whispering to one another, phones beginning to rise. Ethan finally spoke, his voice level and measured. "Ma'am, sir, I parked legally. You were nowhere near this space." The man smirked. "You think you can just waltz into a place like this, drive your beat-up sedan into a luxury plaza and act like you belong?" That line stung the air, but Ethan didn't react, not yet. He had seen far worse than arrogance. He had seen hate in the eyes of men who wore uniforms. He knew how to read danger long before it struck. The man stepped closer, pushing him backward. "I said, move your car." Ethan didn't move. His gaze locked on the company logo on the man's polo shirt, Summit Tactical Systems. Something about that name registered deep in his memory, but he said nothing, not yet. He took a slow breath, the kind that steadies the body when it wants to fight. "Sir, step back," he said quietly. "This doesn't need to go further." The man's wife laughed, recording. "Oh, he's one of those polite ones. They all start calm, then play victim." Another shove. Ethan's shoes scraped the pavement, but he didn't lose balance. Not physically, not emotionally. Years of conditioning kept his heart steady. The crowd had grown larger now. Dozens of eyes on him, but no one intervened. They all wanted to watch. The man shouted again. "Do you know who I am?" Ethan studied his face. Arrogance, ignorance, fear pretending to be power. "Not yet," Ethan replied. "But I will." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Yes, it's me. We've got a situation at Pacific Crest Plaza," he said softly. "I'll handle the first part." He ended the call and put the phone away, calm as ever. The couple didn't know it yet, but the man they were trying to humiliate wasn't just another shopper. He was a man who had stood between nations in silence, a man trained to end chaos before it began. Part 2. The setup 2 hours earlier. Ethan Ward was simply trying to buy a gift. The late afternoon sun shimmered across the coastal skyline of San Diego. He had driven straight from the base after a morning debrief, humming to the radio, thinking about the silver bracelet his wife had been eyeing for months. 15 years of marriage deserved something special. He spotted an open space in front of an upscale jewelry boutique and flicked on his signal. As he began to turn, a glossy black SUV shot toward the same spot from the opposite direction, tires squealing. Ethan slowed, waited for half a second, then parked neatly between the white lines. The SUV stopped behind him, horn blaring like a siren of entitlement. Inside the SUV, Greg Sanders slammed his fist against the steering wheel. "Unbelievable. Did you see that, Lily? He just took our spot." Lily Sanders, mid-40s, adjusted her sunglasses and stared at the parked sedan ahead. Of course he did. "They always think the rules don't apply to them. Want me to go talk to him?" Greg asked, already unbuckling his seatbelt. Lily's lips curved into a cold smile. "Oh, I think we both should." They parked several spaces down. As Greg adjusted his polo shirt emblazoned with Summit Tactical Systems, Lily opened her phone's camera app. "Record this," Greg said. "People should see the kind of disrespect we deal with around here." Unaware of what was coming, Ethan stepped out of his car. Plain jeans, old sneakers, and a calm presence that didn't match the luxury cars around him. He checked his watch, 3 hours until dinner with his wife. Plenty of time to find her gift. Greg's voice sliced through the air behind him. "Hey, you!" That was our spot. Ethan turned. The couple was walking toward him, the woman already recording, her posture dripping with smug confidence. "I didn't see anyone waiting," Ethan replied evenly. "I used my signal and parked within the lines." Greg's face tightened. "You people never see anyone else, do you?" Lily moved around them, circling like a predator with a phone instead of claws. "This is what happens in good neighborhoods now," she said for the camera. No respect for anyone. A few passers-by stopped. No one spoke. Ethan sighed, sensing the eyes on him. Sir, ma'am, I don't want trouble. I'm just here to buy an anniversary gift. Greg snorted. Anniversary? Sure, from this store. Maybe try something more your speed like the discount mall across town. Ethan's gaze flicked again to Greg's company logo, Summit Tactical Systems. The name stuck this time. He knew it. They had a pending bid with the Navy, if memory served. And if that was true, this wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was going to be a reckoning. Sir? Ethan said, tone unchanged. I suggest you stop now. Greg laughed. Or what, you'll call security? At that moment, a security guard appeared, drawn by the noise. He was older, white, with the air of someone who'd already chosen a side. What's the issue here? The guard asked, looking directly at Greg. This man stole our parking spot, Greg replied quickly, then got aggressive when we confronted him. The guard turned to Ethan. Sir, I'll need to see some ID. Ethan's jaw tightened. On what grounds? Standard procedure, the guard lied smoothly. Ethan handed over his identification without a word. The guard studied it longer than necessary, eyes narrowing slightly as he read the name. Commander Ethan Ward, U.S. Navy. A flicker of unease crossed the guard's face. Greg didn't notice. Probably fake, he muttered. People like him always trying to act important. Ethan took back his ID, calm and deliberate. If we're done here, I'll go shop for my wife's gift. The guard hesitated. Just be quick about it. Greg leaned in close, sneering. You better remember this moment, because this neighborhood doesn't forget faces. Ethan's eyes met his, calm, unreadable, but sharp enough to make Greg's pulse quicken. Neither do I, Ethan said softly. Then he turned and walked toward the boutique, leaving the couple fuming behind him. They had no idea that in 10 minutes, their lives and their company would never be the same again. Ethan's steps were steady as he moved through the glass doors of the boutique. Inside, the soft hum of air conditioning met him, along with the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume. The sales associate behind the counter glanced up, her polite smile faltering for a second as she recognized him from outside. I saw what happened, she whispered. I'm so sorry. It's all right, Ethan replied calmly. Let's focus on what I came here for. He leaned over the display of luxury watches, his eyes tracing the curve of a silver piece that gleamed under the lights. That one, he said. The Horizon chronometer. The woman nodded quickly, retrieving it with trembling hands. Ethan's composure unnerved people, but he didn't intend it to. He had lived through chaos most couldn't imagine. A parking lot argument didn't even register on his scale of conflict. As she boxed the watch, Ethan's phone buzzed once. A secure line. He answered with practiced control. Commander Ward, a voice on the other end said. We received your ping. Do we need to intervene? Not yet, Ethan replied. But I'll need a file pulled on a man named Gregory Sanders. Summit Tactical Systems, there was a pause. Understood, sir. We'll run it now. When the call ended, Ethan signed the receipt and thanked the associate. Then he stepped back outside. Across the lot, Greg and Lily were still there, pacing near their SUV, arguing in low tones. He could hear snatches of their conversation as he approached his car again. I'm telling you, Lily hissed. We should post the video. People will take our side. Greg nodded, rubbing his jaw. Yeah, we'll make sure it shows him being arrogant. Maybe tag it with something about respect. They didn't notice Ethan returning to his vehicle. Didn't notice the faint buzz of his phone again. Sir, said the same voice. We found something. Summit Tactical Systems has a meeting scheduled with Naval Procurement tomorrow morning. They're presenting a $50 million bid for base security contracts. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, a slow exhale leaving his chest. The irony was surgical. The man who had just shoved him in a parking lot was about to stand before military command, asking for a deal that required trust, ethics, and honor. He looked back toward the couple. They were laughing now, convinced of their superiority. Copy that, Ethan said. Send an official request to Admiral Cole. I'll handle the rest. Greg noticed him watching and smirked. Oh, look who's back. Couldn't find anything you could afford? Lily snorted. Maybe he's calling his friends to play victim. Ethan said nothing. He simply opened his car door, sat down, and waited. Moments later, 3 black vehicles turned into the lot, gliding in formation like a practiced drill. Government plates. Doors opened and uniformed officers stepped out with purpose. The air changed instantly. The same bystanders who had stared earlier now pulled back, murmuring. Greg's smirk faded. "What the hell is this?" One of the officers approached, a tall man with a commanding voice. "Mr. Gregory Sanders?" Greg's throat tightened. "Yes?" "I'm Commander Ruiz, Naval Special Operations. We need to speak with you regarding your upcoming presentation." Lily blinked rapidly, glancing between the officers and her husband. "Presentation? What's going on?" The officer continued, his tone cool and measured. "It concerns your recent conduct at this location. Our department takes issues of discrimination very seriously, especially when they involve federal contractors." Greg tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. "Wait, this is some misunderstanding. We were just talking." Ruiz turned slightly. "Commander Ward," he said, "you can take it from here." Ethan stepped out of his car, every eye in the parking lot following him. Greg's face drained of color. "Commander?" Ethan approached slowly, not with anger but with composure that radiated authority. "Yes, Commander Ethan Ward, United States Navy. You mentioned your company works with the government." Greg's voice faltered. I didn't realize." "No," Ethan said softly. "You didn't. But now you do." For the first time that afternoon, the silence belonged to Ethan. The crowd that had watched him be humiliated now looked at him with new awareness. The shift was palpable. "Your company has an appointment tomorrow," Ethan continued. "That meeting's been moved up. This afternoon. You'll be debriefed at 1600 hours. Bring your leadership team." Lily finally found her voice. "You can't just—" He met her gaze. "Ma'am, I can, and I will." Greg stood frozen as the officers escorted him toward their SUVs. Lily followed, her phone still in her hand but no longer recording. The power they'd felt moments ago had vanished like smoke. Ethan watched them go, then sat back in his car. The day's sunlight had started to dip, casting long shadows across the lot. His reflection stared back at him from the window, calm, collected, but edged with quiet resolve. This wasn't over. Not yet. Because tomorrow, those who used power to belittle others would have to stand before the same system they'd tried to manipulate and answer to a man they'd tried to humiliate. As the engines of the black SUVs faded, into the distance Ethan started his car and headed toward the naval base. He had work to do, and justice once set in motion doesn't stop halfway. Back at Summit Tactical Systems headquarters, the tension was already spreading like wildfire. Employees whispered in corridors. Phones rang. Emails flew. The clip Lily had uploaded an hour earlier was spreading across social media, edited, cropped, and captioned in ways that twisted the truth. Greg's face appeared in every frame. His words were unmistakable, and soon the world would see exactly who he really was. By dawn the next morning, the story had already reached every corner of the defense community. The video Lily had posted was being dissected on forums and group chats filled with veterans, officers, and analysts. It wasn't just a parking lot argument anymore. It was a test of integrity, and everyone knew it. Inside Summit Tactical Systems, panic hung in the air. Phones rang without pause. Greg Sanders stood in his office, staring at his reflection in the window. The confident man from yesterday was gone. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight, his hands shaking slightly as he read through the emails flooding his inbox. The top subject line hit him like a strike. Urgent. Meeting with Naval Command rescheduled. 1600 hours. He slammed his laptop shut. They can't just move it up like that, they can't. Lily stood by the doorway, her voice quiet for the first time in years. Greg, they can. And they did. She was scrolling through her phone, reading aloud the comments from strangers. This is disgusting. That man's a commander? You've ruined your careers. Never doing business with Summit again. Each line was a cut. Greg looked up, desperate. We'll fix it. I'll explain. They'll understand it was just words. Words, Lily repeated. The same words that got us here. At that exact moment, the front desk called up. Sir, There are military vehicles outside. Greg froze. The sound of tires crunching against gravel filled the air. He could see them through the glass, 3 black SUVs pulling in with absolute precision. The company's security team didn't even try to stop them. They knew better. Minutes later, a group of officers entered, led by Commander Ruiz. Their presence was calm but unshakable, the kind of authority that didn't need to raise its voice. "Mr. Sanders," Ruiz said, "it's time." Greg's attempt at composure failed. "This is an overreaction. I've done nothing illegal." Ruiz didn't answer. He simply motioned to the hallway. "Let's go." At the naval base, a conference room had been prepared, sterile, bright, and heavy with consequence. Ethan stood at one end of the table in full uniform, metals gleaming faintly in the light. His face showed no triumph, only focus. When Greg and Lily entered, the silence was absolute. Admiral Cole sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding the room without a single word. "Mr. and Mrs. Sanders," the Admiral began, "please be seated." They obeyed, the air around them thick with unease. "This review," the Admiral continued, "concerns a potential breach of conduct by leadership at Summit Tactical Systems. We take character as seriously as capability. Commander Ward will provide context." Ethan spoke, his tone steady but firm. "Yesterday, I was harassed and physically confronted in a public setting by Mr. and Mrs. Sanders. They identified themselves as representatives of Summit Tactical Systems, a company currently under consideration for federal defense contracts." He paused, letting the words settle. "They made statements reflecting bias, entitlement, and hostility. This behavior violates not only social standards, but the ethical expectations of those entrusted with military partnerships." Greg tried to interject. "It was just a misunderstanding." Ethan looked at him, and for a second Greg saw the quiet intensity of someone who had faced far worse men and never flinched. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Ethan said. "It was a revelation." The Admiral leaned forward. "Mr. Sanders, we've reviewed the unedited security footage. We've also seen your wife's edited version online. There's no ambiguity." Lily lowered her head, the weight of reality sinking in. Another officer spoke up. "Summit Tactical Systems currently holds 3 federal contracts and is bidding for a 4th valued at $50 million. Under the current ethics code, proven discrimination by leadership can result in full contract termination and federal debarment." Greg's voice cracked. "You're going to destroy my company over one argument?" Ethan's response was calm. "You did that yourself. All I did was watch." The Admiral's gaze shifted to Ethan. "Commander Ward, your recommendation?" Ethan took a breath. "Summit Tactical employs many veterans and skilled engineers. I believe in accountability, not destruction. My recommendation is conditional continuation, retain contracts under new leadership, with mandatory oversight and cultural reform. The Sanders must resign from executive positions effective immediately." Greg blinked, stunned. You're not firing us completely?" "No," Ethan said, "because this isn't about revenge, it's about repair." The Admiral nodded slowly. "Approved. The Sanders will step down. Dr. Amelia Jackson will assume interim leadership. Summit's future depends on how well it learns from this failure." Greg sat motionless, the decision washing over him. He looked at Ethan. "Why? After everything, why give us a chance?" Ethan met his eyes. "Because power means nothing if you use it to destroy. It only matters if you use it to rebuild." Hours later, outside the base, Greg and Lily left the building in silence. Their company car waited by the curb, but neither moved to open the door. The world they'd built was gone, replaced by one they no longer controlled. Across the base, Ethan returned to his office. The weight of the day began to fade, replaced by quiet resolve. Justice, he thought, isn't loud, it's steady. It doesn't need revenge to make its point. Weeks passed. The story spread beyond military circles, sparking debates about accountability and leadership and the power of integrity under pressure. Summit Tactical Systems transformed under new management, implementing diversity programs, veteran outreach, and public transparency. 6 months later, on a calm evening, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, sliding a small velvet box toward his wife, Leah. She opened it and smiled, eyes glistening. Inside was a gold bracelet engraved with a single word: resilience. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "But I thought you already bought me one months ago." He smiled faintly. "That one came with a story. This one comes with peace." Before he could say more, the doorbell rang. When he opened the door, Greg and Lily stood there. No cameras, no arrogance, only humility. Greg cleared his throat. "We've completed the programs, the training, the community work. We came to thank you." Ethan studied them quietly. They looked different, simpler, smaller in the best way. Greg's voice wavered. "I used to think strength meant control, but now I know it means change." Ethan nodded slowly. "The hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought inside ourselves." Leah joined him at the door, offering a kind smile. "Would you like to come in?" The couple hesitated, then stepped inside. The air between them felt lighter, no longer filled with tension, but with something closer to understanding. Later, as they left, Greg turned once more. "You didn't destroy us, you gave us a mirror. It hurt to look at, but it saved us." Ethan watched them drive away in a modest car that replaced their old SUV. He closed the door and turned to Leah. "Do you think they've truly changed?" she asked quietly. "Time will tell," he said. "But change starts when a person stops defending their wrongs and starts confronting them." That night, the city outside glowed under a pale moon. Somewhere in the distance, a new generation of officers sat in a training hall, listening to Ethan Ward's words echo through the room. "True power isn't about dominance," he told them. "It's about discipline. And justice isn't about revenge. It's about balance." As the recruits scribbled notes, none of them knew that those lessons weren't just born from battlefields overseas, but from a simple parking lot, where one man's calm defied hate and one act of restraint changed an entire system. Justice, after all, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands its ground. Months rolled by, and the consequences of that single afternoon continued to ripple outward, reshaping not just a company, but an entire industry. What began as a viral video had become a case study taught in defense leadership programs across the country. The story of a commander who faced prejudice with composure had found its way into policy meetings, seminars, and training manuals. Ethan Ward's name was now synonymous with integrity under fire. Yet to him, the attention felt unnecessary. He hadn't acted for recognition. He had acted because it was right. Still, the reforms that followed were undeniable. The Department of Defense introduced new evaluation standards that didn't just assess a contractor's performance, but their culture. Words like inclusivity and ethics had become measurable metrics. Every week, Ethan received invitations to speak at leadership forums. He rarely accepted them, preferring his work on the ground. But one letter caught his attention. It came from a group of young officers at the Naval Academy who wanted him to deliver a lecture titled "The Quiet Power of Character." He arrived at the Academy auditorium one crisp morning in uniform, his medals gleaming faintly under the stage lights. As he walked onto the platform, hundreds of cadets stood to attention, their eyes fixed on him. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he studied the faces before him, the future of the military, men and women who would one day command others. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, deliberate, and deeply human. "Most people think strength is about what you can force," he began. "But true strength is about what you can endure without losing your humanity." He let the silence hang for a beat. "There will be days when people try to provoke you, humiliate you, break your sense of self-worth. Those are the moments that define you. Not when you fight back, but when you choose not to." He told them nothing about the parking lot, the shouting, or the humiliation. He didn't need to. His story was already known. What mattered now was the lesson it had birthed. After the session, a young cadet approached him shyly. "Sir," she said, What if someone doesn't deserve grace? What if they've done too much harm? Ethan studied her for a moment before answering. Grace isn't given because someone deserves it. It's given because you deserve peace. That night, back in his quiet home, Ethan looked through the open window at the calm horizon. Leah entered the room with 2 cups of tea. "They asked you to speak again, didn't they?" she said. He nodded. "I think I will, but not about the past. About what comes after." "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned against the window frame. "Change doesn't end when justice is served. It ends when people start living differently because of it." Meanwhile, across town, Summit Tactical Systems had become almost unrecognizable. Under Dr. Amelia Jackson's leadership, the once controversial defense firm was thriving in ways that surprised even its harshest critics. The halls that had once echoed with arrogance now buzzed with purpose. Amelia had introduced open forums where employees could voice concerns without fear. Hiring policies had shifted to prioritize veterans, minorities, and women in engineering and leadership roles. Greg and Lily Sanders now worked quietly in technical, advisory roles, stripped of titles but earning back respect through effort. Most employees had initially resented their presence, but over time, something remarkable happened. Their humility became real. They didn't seek sympathy, they sought growth. One afternoon, Amelia walked into Greg's small office. "You've been leading the base security redesign team for 3 months, she said. "You've done good work." Greg looked up, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm recommending you to train new engineers next quarter," she continued. "Not for leadership, just mentorship." Greg hesitated. "After everything, you still trust me with that?" Amelia smiled faintly. "Trust isn't given all at once, it's earned in pieces. You've started earning it." Across the wall behind her hung a framed quote. "Integrity means doing what's right when no one's watching." Greg stared at it long after she left. For the first time, he understood it completely. Later that evening, as he drove home with Lily, she turned to him. "Do you ever think about that day?" He nodded. "Every single one." "Do you regret it?" He took a long breath. "I regret who I was, but I don't regret what it taught me." She smiled weakly. "Then maybe that's enough." Elsewhere, Ethan received a package in the mail. No return address, just a small box wrapped neatly with a single note inside. He opened it to find a custom-made challenge coin, engraved with the Summit Tactical emblem on one side and a simple inscription on the other. "Thank you for teaching us that character outranks position." He turned the coin over in his palm, feeling its weight, not of metal but of transformation. Weeks later, he visited the base for a review. He noticed Summit Tactical's new proposal, written with cleaner processes, detailed security ethics, and cultural standards that mirrored his earlier recommendations. It wasn't just better technology, it was better people. The board approved the project unanimously, and for the first time, Ethan allowed himself to feel genuine pride, not for punishment delivered, but for progress achieved. As he left the base that afternoon, the sun dipped low over the Pacific. The world felt different, quieter, as if the weight of all that had happened had finally found balance. He looked out over the ocean, remembering the day he'd stood chest-deep in cold water during SEAL training, fighting exhaustion, fear, and pain. Back then, his instructors had shouted the same phrase over and over: "Control your reaction, control the situation." Now he finally understood what they'd meant. Justice wasn't about dominance. It was about control of self, of anger, of the choice to do right when vengeance would be easier. He smiled faintly, watching the horizon fade into gold. Somewhere behind him, systems were changing, people were healing, and lessons were being passed on to those who would one day face their own tests of character. And though the world would remember him for what he did that day, Ethan Ward would always remember what he didn't do. He didn't lash out. He didn't retaliate. He chose to lead when no one else had the courage to. And that choice changed everything. 2 years later, the day that had once defined Ethan's life became a milestone in a much larger movement. Defense industry conferences now began with discussions on ethics, human dignity and leadership accountability. Policies that once existed only on paper had turned into real standards, backed by mandatory ethics evaluations and human behavior audits for all federal contractors. At the center of it all, without ever seeking the spotlight, stood Ethan Ward. He had been promoted twice, now a captain, and was leading a new program designed to strengthen moral leadership among both officers and civilians who worked with the Navy. But more importantly, he had found balance again. The noise of the world had quieted into purpose. He had moved with Leah to a modest home near Monterey, where sea winds carried the scent of salt and pine. On weekends, he helped train young recruits at the academy nearby. During the week, he worked on what was now unofficially known as the Ward Initiative, a framework that focused on decision-making under moral pressure. One crisp morning, while reviewing cadet reports, he received a message from an unfamiliar sender. The subject line read, "Request for meeting, Greg and Lily Sanders." For a long moment, he didn't move. Their names hadn't crossed his path in over a year. Leah entered the study, reading his expression before he spoke. "It's them, isn't it?" He nodded. "They're requesting a meeting. Will you see them?" "Yes," he said quietly. "It's time." 3 days later, they met at a quiet coastal cafe overlooking the water. Greg arrived first, older, thinner, but standing straighter than before. Lily followed, carrying a small envelope. When Ethan approached their table, they both rose. "Commander Ward, captain now," Greg corrected himself, offering a hand. "Thank you for coming." Ethan shook his hand, his grip firm but not cold. "You didn't need to thank me." "You asked and I agreed." They sat. There was a long, heavy silence before Lily spoke. "We've rebuilt, sir. Not the way we once dreamed, but in a way that finally feels right. We started a nonprofit. It supports diversity training and veteran reintegration into civilian jobs. We named it the Bridge Project." Ethan listened without interrupting. "We couldn't have done it if you hadn't handled things the way you did," she said softly. "If you'd wanted revenge instead of reform, we'd be gone. But because you gave us the chance to change, we became better people." Greg opened the envelope and slid a small photo across the table. It showed a group of young engineers, smiling, arms around each other, wearing badges that read Bridge Project Interns. "They're all veterans," Greg said. "Many of them were rejected by other companies. We're training them, giving them a second chance, like you gave us." Ethan studied the photograph. It wasn't just a picture, it was proof that pain, handled with wisdom, could turn into purpose. He looked up. "You've done something good. I can respect that." Greg nodded, emotion tightening his voice. "I had to face the person I became that day. The man who used his position to look down on others. It took me a long time to realize that arrogance isn't power. It's fear," Ethan said quietly. "Fear of being less." Greg's eyes met his. "Exactly." They spoke for hours, not about contracts or reputation, but about growth, about family, about what it meant to rebuild from the ruins of your own mistakes. When the meeting ended, Lily stood and said, "Before we go, there's one more thing." She handed Ethan a medal encased in glass. It was engraved with the words, "To those who chose justice over pride." Ethan turned it over in his hand. "You didn't have to do this. We wanted to," Greg said. "It's not a symbol of debt. It's a symbol of gratitude." They shook hands once more, this time as equals. After they left, Ethan remained seated by the window, watching the waves crash against the rocks. The world had changed since that day in the parking lot. Maybe not completely, but enough to matter. Later that year, the Navy officially integrated the Ward Initiative into all branches of federal contracting policy. It required empathy training for executives, behavioral accountability for leadership, and real consequences for discrimination. Ethan refused public recognition. Instead, he asked that the program's core statement be published anonymously in the handbook. It read simply, "Character is tested not in moments of comfort, but when dignity collides with power. Choose dignity." A year later, during a national ethics symposium, Dr. Amelia Jackson gave a keynote address. She spoke about transformation, not as a concept, but as something living and real. When she reached the end, she said, "There's a man who changed how we see justice. He didn't destroy those who wronged him. He guided them toward who they could become." The audience rose to their feet, clapping not for a name, but for an idea. That evening, Ethan watched the broadcast at home. Leah beside him. She looked at him and smiled. "You changed more than you realize." He shook his head. "Maybe I just reminded people that change is possible." They stepped outside together, the sky painted with the colors of dusk. The ocean murmured in the distance, steady and eternal. Ethan glanced down at the metal on his desk as the light from the setting sun caught its edge. For the first time he felt something that had eluded him for years. Not victory, not pride, but peace. Because true justice doesn't end when the guilty are punished. It ends when the world learns from what happened and never repeats it again. The years passed quietly, and the ripples of that moment grew wider than anyone could have imagined. What began as a confrontation in a parking lot had evolved into a movement that changed how institutions defined strength, accountability, and leadership. But no one felt that more deeply than Ethan Ward himself. He had devoted his life to service, not recognition. The Navy had given him medals, plaques, and honors, but he always tucked them away in drawers. What mattered to him wasn't ceremony. It was the change he could see in people. Yet as time moved on, he began to notice something unsettling. The same systems he had helped reform were slowly drifting back toward comfort, bureaucracy, and politics. At first it was subtle. Corporate boards cutting corners, leaders speaking eloquently about ethics while ignoring them behind closed doors. It was the kind of decay that came quietly, wearing the mask of progress. One evening, as he reviewed reports from several defense contractors, Ethan noticed familiar patterns. Cases marked resolved that clearly weren't. Complaints labeled training issue when they were patterns of discrimination. It was the kind of paper trail that hid rot beneath polished signatures. He pushed back from his desk and stared at the screen. He had spent years helping others learn integrity, and now the same integrity was being buried under procedure. Leah entered the room, reading the worry in his face. "It's happening again, isn't it?" He nodded slowly. "Not everywhere, but enough to undo what we started." "Then you'll stop it again," she said simply. Her faith in him was absolute. It always had been. The next morning, Ethan met with Admiral Cole in Washington. The Admiral looked older now, but his eyes still carried the same authority. "I've been watching your reports," Cole said. "You think the culture's slipping?" "I know it is," Ethan replied. "They learned how to sound accountable without being accountable. If we let this stand, all of it, the reforms, the protocols, it'll turn to ash." The Admiral studied him for a moment, then leaned back. "So what do you propose?" Ethan hesitated. He'd been thinking about this for months. "We start something independent. A unit that doesn't answer to profit or politics. A watchdog that audits ethics, not numbers." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about a moral intelligence division." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. And I'll lead it." The Admiral smiled faintly. "You always were dangerous when you had time to think." Within months, the proposal became reality. It was named the Sentinel Program, a branch that existed outside the chain of command, composed of veterans, ethicists, investigators, and data analysts. Its mission: to detect and dismantle corruption at any level from contractors to command. But its first major case struck close to home. A report came in from an anonymous whistleblower at Summit Tactical Systems. Ethan's pulse slowed. He read the file twice. It wasn't Greg or Lily this time. They had long since retired from public life. But someone new, a rising executive accused of manipulating diversity programs for profit. Under the surface of progress, greed had found a way to hide again. He gathered his team. "We're not targeting Summit," he said. "We're targeting the disease that hides in its shadow." The investigation was swift, thorough, and unrelenting. By the end of it, Summit's new leadership was exposed for falsifying compliance reports and silencing internal complaints. Yet what shocked everyone was that the first person to come forward publicly against them was Greg Sanders himself. He appeared on record, calm and resolute, testifying about the importance of integrity and transparency. His voice, once dripping with arrogance, now carried weight because it had known shame. When the inquiry concluded, Summit was stripped of temporary contracts but allowed to rebuild again, this time under even tighter oversight. And once more, Ethan was asked why he didn't push for full dissolution. "Because punishment ends stories," he said. "Redemption writes new ones." The Sentinel program grew rapidly after that, expanding beyond the Navy into civilian agencies and international coalitions. Ethan found himself traveling across the world, Brussels, Tokyo, Sydney, teaching governments how to weave ethics into their infrastructure, how to protect justice from politics. But every time he stood before a crowd, he carried the same message. You don't fight corruption with rage, he would say. You fight it with courage. Rage burns hot and fast. Courage burns steady and long. One evening, after years of tireless work, he returned home to find Leah waiting on the porch. Her hair had silvered, but her eyes still carried that same patient light. You did it again, she said softly. He smiled. We did it. They sat together watching the horizon, the sea glowing beneath a setting sun. The air felt timeless, filled with salt and wind and peace. Then Leah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you ever think about how it all began? He nodded. Every time I see someone stand their ground without hate, every time a person chooses integrity over ego, I think of that day. She looked at him, smiling gently. And do you think you'd change anything? Ethan turned toward the fading light, the memory of the parking lot, the shouts, the humiliation, the silence. No, he said. Because if I had lost control that day, the world would have lost something too. The wind picked up, carrying with it the sound of the waves below. He felt the years settle quietly behind him, not as weight but as purpose fulfilled. Later that night, when he finally turned off the lights in his study, his eyes caught the reflection of the old challenge coin sitting on the shelf. The one Greg had sent him years ago. Thank you for teaching us that character outranks position. He smiled, whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, and closed the door. And outside, under the endless night sky, the world kept moving forward, just a little fairer, a little braver, and a little wiser, because one man had once chosen restraint over rage and turned justice into a story the world would never forget.